Everyone is looking at the ransom notes. Nobody is talking about what was left on the ground outside her front door. That ends today. Day 68. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. The family reward stands at $1 million. The FBI has its own separate reward of $100,000. More than $1.2 million combined. And not one arrest. But this video is not about the notes. It is not about Bitcoin demands, or the new message that arrived this week, claiming she was seen in Mexico. This video is about something a retired FBI agent looked at on April 8th, in the same drone footage that millions of people have already watched, and said out loud that she could not believe had not been addressed publicly. She was not looking at the masked man at the door, she was looking at the ground. The circle driveway at the home in the Catalina foothills is made of decomposed granite. That surface is difficult to work with, but difficult is not impossible. Not when the FBI maintains a tire impression database containing thousands of vehicle profiles. Not when a partial mark on decomposed granite, processed with oblique lighting, and the right photographer, can tell you the make and model of a car. Before we go any further, let me correct something that a lot of coverage has gotten wrong. The last person to see Nancy Guthrie was not her daughter Annie. It was Annie's husband, Tommaso Cioni, who drove Nancy home that evening. He watched the garage door close behind her at 9:48 in the evening on January 31st. That is the last confirmed sighting. 1:47 in the morning, the doorbell camera disconnected. 2:28 in the morning, her pacemaker stopped syncing with her Apple devices. Her blood was confirmed on the front porch. The back doors of the house were found propped open. She was an 84-year-old woman who could not walk 50 yards on her own. Authorities believe she was carried out of that house and placed into a vehicle that had to pull up to that circle driveway to do it. And if it did, it left something behind on that decomposed granite. Something the investigation has not mentioned once in 68 days. Subscribe to True Crime Vault right now if you want every detail of this case, not just the ones that make the front page. There is a former FBI special agent who has spent years processing this exact type of crime scene evidence. She watched the same drone footage you have seen, and the first thing she noticed was not what everyone else noticed. What she found when she looked at that driveway, and what it connects to the vehicle authorities seized 2 miles from this house 6 weeks into this investigation, is what we are covering today. She has a specific concern, and when you hear it, you will understand why the silence around it is not an accident. Maureen McConnell is not a YouTuber with a theory. She is not a podcaster reading court documents for the first time. She spent years inside the FBI as a special agent, processing crime scenes, working evidence, understanding what surfaces hold information and what surfaces give it up. When she looks at a crime scene photograph, she is not looking for drama. She is looking for what was left behind. So when she sat down on April 8th to review drone footage from Nancy Guthrie's property, the same footage that had been publicly available for weeks, she was not watching it the way most people watch it. Most people look at the masked man at the door. McConnell looked at the ground. The circle driveway at the home in the Catalina foothills is surfaced with decomposed granite. According to McConnell, that was the first thing she registered. Decomposed granite is not concrete. It is not asphalt. It compresses unevenly, it shifts under weight, and it holds impressions differently depending on moisture, temperature, and how much pressure was applied. A car pulling into that driveway, stopping long enough to load an 84-year-old woman who could not walk on her own, and then leaving, would press into that surface. And according to McConnell, the FBI maintains a tire impression database containing thousands of vehicle profiles. Partial marks, partial tread patterns, cross-referenced against make, model, and year of manufacture. The surface is difficult. That is not the same as useless. There was one thing McConnell said about that driveway, though, that stopped the conversation in a way most people did not notice when they heard it. She said she would have been looking at the circle drive. She said it in the past, conditional. Would have. Not that she knew it had been done. Not that she had seen evidence it was processed. She said she would have done it. In 68 days of public updates covering DNA, backpack models, holster brands, and surveillance footage recovered from Google's back-end servers, the words tire tracks have appeared publicly once. In a single interview, from a retired agent speaking in the conditional tense. That is not a gap in the investigation. That may be a gap in what the investigation has told us. Because here is what we know about that driveway. Investigators believe Nancy was carried from the house and placed into a vehicle. The back doors were found propped open, but McConnell's assessment, based on drone footage, is that the circle driveway at the front is where the vehicle pulled up. That driveway is visible in footage that has been publicly released. and the FBI has a database specifically designed to match tire impressions to vehicles. The question is not whether the technology exists. The question is whether it was used before the crime scene was released. That is where the concern becomes specific. According to McConnell, when she looked at the drone footage, she could not confirm from what she saw that tire impression processing had taken place. She noted that the Pima County Sheriff's Department had been on scene before the FBI arrived. She noted that the crime scene was released after 2 days. She was not accusing anyone of negligence. She was raising a question that has not been answered, and that question connects directly to a vehicle that was seized from a parking lot 2 miles away. On the night of February 13th into the early hours of February 14th, FBI agents and a Pima County SWAT team executed a federal search warrant at a residence approximately 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home. In the parking lot of a nearby Culver's restaurant, law enforcement stopped a gray Range Rover. The vehicle was searched. Then it was towed away. At least 3 people were detained across both locations that night. All were released. No charges were filed. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed the following morning that the individual stopped in that parking lot was, in his words, their person of interest. He said the man was cooperative. He said the man was released. He did not say the man was cleared. Those are different statements. And the search warrant connected to the operation remains sealed. The forensic results from the Range Rover have not been publicly disclosed. The FBI has not commented on what, if anything, that vehicle yielded. If tire impressions were collected from Nancy Guthrie's Circle driveway, and if that FBI database was used, those impressions could potentially match or eliminate a specific vehicle. A gray Range Rover seized 2 miles from her home is a specific vehicle. The investigation has both pieces. Whether they have been placed next to each other is something no one in law enforcement has addressed publicly. That is the bridge bomb this case is sitting on. Not the ransom notes, not the Bitcoin demands, the tire tracks and the vehicle and the sealed warrant, and the question that nobody has asked on camera with enough specificity to require an answer. Sheriff Nanos did not say the person of interest was their suspect. He said cooperative. In the vocabulary of law enforcement, cooperative means willing to answer questions. It does not mean innocent. It does not mean ruled out. It means the conversation happened, and that person walked away without handcuffs. That person is still in Tucson. Now let us talk about what that actually means for this investigation. The FBI does not execute a federal search warrant based on a hunch. Federal warrants require probable cause established to the satisfaction of a federal judge. Something in this investigation, confirmed and credible enough to meet that legal threshold, pointed law enforcement toward that residence and that vehicle on that specific night. Whatever that something was, it is contained in a sealed document that the public cannot read. But we can read what was said out loud. Nanos told Fox News the following morning that every day going forward, there would be police activity throughout the community. He said leads start in the command post and move to the field. He said that is why activity builds up as the day goes on and can ultimately lead to a search warrant looking for Nancy and any suspect involved. He used the word ultimately. He did not use the word finally. Here is the detail this case turns on. The FBI, according to NBC News, was canvassing gun shops in the Tucson area and showing investigators a list of close to a dozen specific names. A gun shop owner named Philip Martin confirmed agents came to him with that list. He confirmed he was shown 18 to 24 names and photographs. This is not a wide-open investigation casting a net into the dark. This is an investigation with a list, with photographs, with names that someone, somewhere in the FBI, considered worth putting on paper and walking into stores. The tire tracks on the driveway connect to a vehicle. The vehicle connects to a person. The person was detained, called a person of interest, and released without charges. And somewhere in the FBI's possession is a sealed warrant that may explain why that person was worth a federal operation in the first place. If you have been watching this case and wondering why 68 days have passed without an arrest, subscribe to True Crime Vault. Because the answer may not be that investigators have nothing. The answer may be that they are building something they are not ready to show yet. There is one more piece here, and it reframes the entire vehicle question in a way that has not been discussed publicly. The suspect seen on Nancy Guthrie's doorbell camera was not passing through her neighborhood by accident. Retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent Vermore noted early in the investigation than the street where Nancy lived. It is not a road people drive down without a reason. If you are on that street, you mean to be on that street. Moore told CNN that investigators would likely have, by that point, a list of all vehicles owned by people within the neighborhood. Every car that belonged to a resident. Every car that did not. A gray Range Rover 2 miles from that driveway. A sealed warrant. a person of interest who is cooperative but not cleared. And on that driveway, decomposed granite that may still hold the answer to the first question this case has always needed answered. What vehicle came for Nancy Guthrie, and who was driving it? There is something investigators confirmed early in this case, and then almost immediately stopped talking about: the gloves. Most people following this case believe the DNA from those gloves is still an active lead. It is not. Let me be precise about what actually happened, because the version most channels reported is incomplete in a way that matters. Gloves matching the type worn by the suspect in Nancy Guthrie's doorbell footage were found approximately 2 miles from her home. Preliminary testing identified DNA belonging to an unknown male. That DNA was submitted to CODIS, the FBI's national database. No match came back. Investigators then continued working the sample. They traced it. And according to Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos, that DNA was ultimately connected to a local restaurant worker who was not considered part of this investigation. That thread is closed. The DNA that matters is not from the gloves. It is from inside the house. Partial DNA recovered from Nancy Guthrie's home, DNA that may belong to the suspect, is currently being analyzed through genetic genealogy. Sheriff Nanos confirmed this publicly. He told NBC News that investigators believe they may have suspect DNA, but it needs to be separated and sorted before it can be submitted through genealogy channels. That process takes time, in some cases, months. One person who has worked directly alongside genetic genealogy investigators in missing persons cases described the process this way: it is not a search, it is a reconstruction. You take the unknown DNA profile, upload it to a public database, find distant relatives who submitted their own DNA out of curiosity, and then you build backward through the family tree until you arrive at a name. That name then gets cross-referenced against everything else the investigation has already developed: the geography, the physical description, the vehicle connections, the timeline. If that process is running right now on DNA from inside Nancy Guthrie's home, the result will not come back as a confirmation of guilt. It will come back as a direction, a name to look at, and in this case, a name to place next to a sealed search warrant and a gray Range Rover and a circle driveway on a dead-end street that nobody drives down by accident. That genealogy result has not come, or if it has not been announced. They are not saying the process failed. They are not saying the sample was too degraded. They are saying nothing about the DNA inside that house. And in an investigation where every other forensic development has been shared with the public in real time, that silence about that specific sample is not routine. But there is another detail in this investigation that connects to the question of how much was actually processed at that scene, and how quickly: the utility box. Approximately 1 block from Nancy Guthrie's home, a utility box showed signs of having been tampered with. Nanos confirmed investigators were looking at it. He also confirmed, in the same breath, that it was not connected to a utility box around the corner from the home. He said the tampering was not tied to the case. That timeline works, unless you look at what happened to the power and internet in Nancy Guthrie's home in the early hours of February 1st. Nanos separately confirmed that investigators were looking into a power or internet outage that morning. The doorbell camera disconnected at 1:47 in the morning. That is a specific timestamp. If the outage and the camera disconnection happened in the same window, and if that utility box 1 block away showed signs of external interference, the question of whether those things are connected is not a conspiracy theory. It is a forensic question, one that has not been answered publicly. Nanos said the tampered utility box was not connected to the case. He did not say the outage had been fully explained. Those are two different statements. This investigation has a pattern. A detail surfaces. It generates attention. An official says it is not connected, and then it disappears from the public conversation. The utility box, the gloves DNA, the 3 people detained and released, each one announced and then quietly folded back into the investigation, with no follow-up confirmation that it was truly eliminated. The FBI has fielded between 40,000 and 50,000 leads in this case. Investigators have canvassed gun shops with a list of close to a dozen names and photographs. 400 investigators were working the case 17 days in, according to Nanos. By day 68, no public suspect, no named individual, no confirmation that any single lead was the lead. A law enforcement insider who spoke to News Nation in early April, with their identity protected for fear of retaliation, said bluntly that there is no direct suspect and no name on the table. They said the individuals involved are either extremely lucky or more cunning than most people in this kind of work have seen before. And they added something that has stayed with people who followed this case closely. They said if you take the second possibility, that this was planned with precision, there is a real chance that whoever did this covered their tracks so carefully that finding out what happened may not be possible right now. That is a law enforcement insider, not a YouTube commenter. Someone inside this investigation saying, on the record with anonymity, that the architecture of what happened to Nancy Guthrie may have been designed to survive scrutiny. She was an 84-year-old woman who could not walk 50 yards on her own. She was taken in her pajamas, without her shoes, without the medication that keeps her heart beating at the right rhythm. Whoever came for her that night did not stumble across her by chance. They knew the house, they knew the driveway, they knew the schedule. They knew the camera was there and brought something to cover it with. If you are praying for Nancy Guthrie and her family right now, leave a word in the comments below. It does not take long. One word like amen or praying is enough. Because Nancy is not a case number, she is a person, and every reminder of that matters. Now there is one more layer to this investigation that almost nobody has addressed directly. And it may explain why, after 68 days and more than $1.2 million in reward money, this case still does not have a public suspect. The investigation itself has a problem. According to a law enforcement insider who spoke to News Nation, the lead investigator assigned to the Nancy Guthrie case reportedly had no prior homicide experience before this investigation. In a case that Nanos himself described as involving evidence of a crime inside the house, blood on the front porch, a masked armed intruder, and a missing elderly woman believed to have been abducted in the middle of the night, the person carrying the case had not worked a homicide before. Former Surgeon General Richard Carmona, who also spent 30 years as a Pima County Sheriff's veteran, was among those who publicly criticized the handling of the investigation. He cited what he described as a compromised crime scene and the rejection of FBI laboratory resources in the early stages. Legal observers raised a separate concern. The crime scene at Nancy Guthrie's home was released after 2 days. In major abduction cases, crime scenes are often held for weeks. The decision to release it early drew questions that have never been answered on the record. And now, the Pima County Board of Supervisors has voted unanimously to open an investigation into Sheriff Nanos himself, following a workplace harassment complaint filed by a former lieutenant who ran against him in the last election. The investigation into what happened to Nancy Guthrie is running alongside an investigation into the man leading the investigation into what happened to Nancy Guthrie. That is where this case stands on day 68. Tire tracks on decomposed granite that may or may not have been processed. A sealed search warrant connected to a gray Range Rover and a person of interest who was cooperative but not cleared. DNA inside the house, being rebuilt through genealogy. A lead investigator who reportedly had never worked a case like this before. And a sheriff facing his own inquiry. Something happened on that driveway. A vehicle came, a vehicle left. And somewhere between the decomposed granite and the sealed warrant and the 40,000 leads that have not produced a single public name, the answer to who drove that vehicle is waiting. The question is whether the people responsible for finding it are the right people for the job. Here is what this investigation has been building toward. Not the ransom notes, not the Bitcoin demands. Not the question of whether Savannah's return to television was coordinated with law enforcement to keep pressure on whoever has her mother. All of that is real, and all of it matters. But the center of this case, the thing that connects the masked man at the door to the sealed warrant to the person of interest who walked away from a Culver's parking lot without handcuffs, is a question about a vehicle. And before we go further, you deserve to know exactly what has been officially confirmed in this investigation, and what has only been reported. Because in a case this big, with this much media coverage, the line between those two things has been blurred in ways that are not fair to you. Here is what we know with certainty, and here is what remains reported but unconfirmed, because you deserve to know the difference. What is confirmed? On the night of February 13th into the early hours of February 14th, the FBI and Pima County SWAT executed a federal search warrant at a residence approximately 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home in the Catalina foothills. A gray Range Rover was stopped in the parking lot of a nearby Culver's restaurant. The vehicle was searched. It was towed. At least 3 individuals were detained across both locations. All were released. No arrests were made. Sheriff Nanos confirmed the following morning, on the record with Fox News, that the individual stopped at Culver's was their person of interest. He confirmed the man was cooperative. He confirmed the man was released. The search warrant connected to that operation is sealed by a federal court. The forensic results from the Range Rover have not been publicly disclosed. What has been reported by credentialed sources, but not officially confirmed. According to a law enforcement insider speaking to News Nation in early April, whose identity was protected, There is currently no direct suspect and no name on the table in this investigation. According to retired FBI Special Agent Maureen McConnell, tire impressions on the circle driveway at Nancy Guthrie's home may not have been processed before the crime scene was released. According to retired FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell, the FBI knows how many sets of fingerprints were found inside that house and has information about the offender that could be shaped into a public profile and has chosen not to release it. None of those 3 assessments have been confirmed or denied by the FBI or the Pima County Sheriff's Department. That is the map, confirmed on one side, reported on the other, and the space between them is where Nancy Guthrie's answer may be sitting right now. Now here is what that space looks like when you look at it all together. Federal warrants do not come from suspicion. They come from evidence. A federal judge reviewed whatever probable cause was presented in connection with that residence and that vehicle and signed off on it. That probable cause is sealed, but the act of sealing it is itself information. You seal a warrant when you do not want the subject of the investigation to know what led investigators to them. You seal it when the investigation is still moving. You seal it when you are not done. The warrant for that residence near Nancy Guthrie's home is still sealed as of day 68. The forensic results from the gray Range Rover have not been announced. The person of interest has not been publicly named and has not been publicly cleared. In 68 days, through tens of thousands of leads and hundreds of investigators and more than $1.2 million in reward money, those 3 facts have not changed. And that is not evidence of nothing. That is evidence of something being held very carefully. Now here is the detail this case has needed someone to sit with. Subscribe to True Crime Vault before we go further, because what comes next is the piece that connects the driveway to the vehicle to the person, and we are staying on this until it breaks. The suspect seen on Nancy Guthrie's doorbell camera wore a ski mask, dark clothing, a 25-liter black Ozark trail hiker backpack, a holstered pistol identified by a police expert as consistent with a Strategy large-frame revolver hip holster, sold at Walmart for approximately $10. He was 5'9" to 5'10", average build. His eyes and the outline of a black mustache were visible through the holes in the mask. That is a specific person. The FBI walked into gun shops in Tucson with a list of close to a dozen names and photographs. A gun shop owner confirmed that. A specific list, specific names, specific photographs. The investigation is not casting into the dark. It is aiming at something. Now, hold that next to what retired FBI agent Steve Moore said early in the investigation. He told CNN that the street where Nancy Guthrie lived is not a thoroughfare. Nobody drives down it by accident. If you are there, you mean to be there. And he said investigators would likely have, by that point in the investigation, a full list of every vehicle belonging to every resident in that neighborhood. Every car accounted for. Every car that was not. A gray Range Rover stopped 2 miles away. A person of interest who, by the sheriff's own words, was their person of interest. A sealed warrant that a federal judge decided was worth signing. Here is the question that nobody in law enforcement has answered publicly, and that you are in as good a position to consider as anyone who has been following this case. The search warrant connected to the February 14th operation is sealed. The person of interest was released. The Range Rover was towed. If the forensic results from that vehicle came back clear, if the tire profile did not match anything, if the DNA inside the car had no connection to Nancy Guthrie's home, the standard practice would be to say so, publicly. To close that thread and move resources elsewhere. They have not said that. They have not said the Range Rover was clear. They have not said the person of interest was eliminated. They have not said the warrant came back empty. The Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI have said nothing about what that operation produced. And in this investigation, where every other development has been announced the moment it was confirmed, that specific silence about that specific operation is not routine. What does it mean that the only operation in this investigation significant enough to require a federal warrant and a SWAT team is also the only operation whose results have never been made public? You can hold that question. You should hold that question, because it does not have an official answer yet. And somewhere in that unanswered space, an 84-year-old woman who could not walk across her own living room without help is still waiting to be found. She was taken in her pajamas, without her shoes, without the medication her pacemaker depended on. The garage door closed behind her at 9:48 in the evening, and by 2:28 in the morning, every device that connected her to the world had gone silent. That is where day 68 begins. The FBI has confirmed the investigation remains active. Investigators are continuing to work the partial DNA from inside the house through genetic genealogy. They are continuing to track the pacemaker, working with the manufacturer to determine if any signal has been detected. The family reward of $1 million remains active. The FBI's separate reward of $100,000 remains active. The most recent ransom note, reportedly received by TMZ on April 7th, claimed for the first time that Nancy had been seen in a specific location in Sonora, Mexico, and claimed for the first time that she had died. That note has not been authenticated. The FBI has not confirmed it. The FBI has not denied it. They are not saying the Mexico claim was investigated and cleared. They are not saying it was dismissed as fabricated. They are not saying anything about a note that named a specific location in a neighboring country, claimed that an 84-year-old woman who left her home without her heart medication is no longer alive. That silence, in a case where every other detail has been addressed within days of surfacing, is a choice someone made. Earlier in this investigation, Savannah Guthrie told Hoda Kotb that she believes 2 of the ransom notes are legitimate. She said her family responded to those 2 notes specifically. She said they were ready to pay. The family released a video in early February that appeared to address whoever has Nancy directly, saying they received the message and were ready to talk. That was more than 2 months ago. The family has heard nothing back that has been confirmed as authentic. Savannah returned to the Today Show on April 6th. Former FBI agent Harry Trombitis told Yahoo News he believes the timing of her return was likely coordinated between law enforcement and the family to humanize Nancy in the public eye, to signal to whoever has her that they are not forgotten, and to keep the case visible. Trombitis said in a case with no major breakthroughs and no named suspect, keeping the story alive is itself an investigative tool. That is what Day 68 looks like. Not a cold case, an active one, but one where the answers are being held in sealed documents and unpublished forensic results and the deliberate silence of a federal agency that is very good at saying nothing when saying nothing serves a purpose. There are at least 2 questions in this investigation that have no official answer tonight. What did the forensic analysis of that gray Range Rover show? And whether the tire impressions on the circle driveway of a house in the Catalina foothills were ever processed before the crime scene was released. One of those questions may have been answered inside a sealed warrant. The other may still be sitting on the ground outside her front door. The reward is still active. The tip line is still open. If you have any information about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. The family is not giving up. The investigators are not giving up. And True Crime Vault is not giving up. We will be here when something breaks. Cases like this do not happen in a vacuum. And the more you understand how someone chooses a target, the harder it is to look away from what this case is actually teaching us. Nancy Guthrie lived alone in the Catalina foothills for decades. She had a doorbell camera. She had a garage. She had family nearby. By most measures, she was not living carelessly. But the person who came for her on the night of January 31st had clearly spent time studying the details of her life before he arrived. The FBI asked residents within a 2-mile radius to submit any footage from 4 weeks before she disappeared. 4 weeks. That is not a request you make unless you believe the suspect was watching, driving the area, learning the patterns, long before he put on that ski mask. That surveillance window is the first thing this case teaches us about how these crimes are built. They are not impulsive. They are constructed. The masked man who arrived at Nancy's door knew which camera to tamper with. He knew the camera was connected to the internet and brought something to cover the lens when he could not remove it. He knew the layout of the property well enough to approach from the right angle. He brought a backpack. He brought a weapon. He had a vehicle waiting. For anyone with an elderly parent or grandparent living alone, this case carries a specific kind of weight. The details matter. Cloud-connected cameras, the kind Nancy had, store footage on remote servers even if the device itself is tampered with or destroyed. That is the only reason the FBI was able to recover the footage at all. It came from Google's back-end systems, not from the camera sitting on the porch. A camera that only saves locally gives an intruder a way to erase themselves. A camera connected to the cloud does not. The predictability of Nancy's schedule also matters. She missed church on the morning of February 1st, and her family knew within hours. That check-in, that expectation of contact on a specific day at a specific time, is what triggered the search. Without it, the window before anyone noticed she was gone could have been far longer. Regular scheduled contact, a daily check-in call, a weekly routine that someone is expected to show up for, is not just comfort. In cases like this, it is the mechanism that starts the clock. The suspect in this case also understood medication dependency. Nancy Guthrie relied on daily medication. Her pacemaker required it. Savannah confirmed her mother was taken without it. Whether that vulnerability was factored into the planning is not confirmed, but it was known. Her need for daily care was a documented part of her life, and it was not protected. This case is still developing. Subscribe to True Crime Vault for every update the moment it happens. We are not leaving this story. Nancy Guthrie knew her neighborhood. She had lived in that community for more than 5 decades. She had dinner with her daughter the night she disappeared. She came home. The garage door closed behind her, and someone who had been watching her home for possibly weeks was already waiting. She was an 84-year-old woman who cannot walk far on her own. Someone carried her out of that house in the middle of the night. The circle driveway may hold the answer to who drove away with her. The sealed warrant may hold the answer to who investigators already believe that person is. And the genealogy process running on DNA from inside her home may, when it finishes, put a name to a face that has been hidden behind a ski mask for 68 days. If the tire tracks were processed before that scene was released, why haven't we heard anything? Her shoes are still by the door, her medication is still on the counter, and Nancy Guthrie is still missing.